Hello and welcome to a bonus Blood Red podcast, a Q&A special. We normally get you to submit your questions every few months, often mysteriously at the time of an international break when there's not much happening. Wonder why that could be. And we did that, of course, a week or so ago with you responding in droves. Liverpool, though, had other ideas about it being a quiet time, deciding to splash an initial £37 million on signing Luis Diaz. And then, of course, they went after Fulham's Fabio Carvalho too. That meant that we didn't have time at the time to answer your questions, but we haven't forgotten them, and we are going to go back through them and have a look through them now. With me to do that are the Echoes Ian Doyle and Hannah Pinnock, and we might as well dive straight in, Doyle. There's plenty of questions to go through. Hopefully, I won't butcher too many people's names. The first one should be fine. Ellie McDowell, and Ellie asks, I keep seeing that Liverpool have signed Luis Diaz. This means that they will have to sell either Sadio Mane or Mohamed Salah. Would it not make more sense for them to maybe lose a squad player like Divock Origi or someone else somewhere else across the pitch? What are your thoughts on that one? And obviously, Ellie, they're asking about a new signing and what that means for the future of the front three.
Easy one to start with. I think you got to bear in mind that probably Origi's leaving anyway, and Minamino. Interested to see what happens with him in the summer. And the other thing is Diaz wasn't. We've said this on the podcast a few times now. Diaz wasn't supposed to be here. He only signed him in last month because Tottenham were going to sign him, so they were going to move for him in the summer. So there is that. You have to bear that in mind. I mean, Liverpool, yeah. I mean, if they do lose Origi, well, they probably will lose Origi. They could lose Minamino. They're going to need numbers up front, and perhaps Diaz is somebody there that they bought him with that in mind. But the other thing is the complication is that Salah, Firmino, and Mane at the end of the season will only have a year left on the contract, and we've said a long time that at least one of them will probably sign a new deal, and I wouldn't be surprised if one of them moves on because things change, football changes, and perhaps they've seen there's a big competition for places in the Liverpool lineup, and they've thought, well, I've been here 5 or 6 years. It's time for me to go and do something new, and that would be fair enough. But that's just me guessing. I mean, yeah, ultimately, I think ideally Jurgen Klopp would like to keep all of them, but he knows he's probably not going to be able to.
Yeah, quite a few people, Hannah, are asking about whether the Luis Diaz signing will sort of have an impact on contract negotiations and what people might be thinking in terms of that front three or front four as it is now. What are your thoughts on that? Is it a case that Luis Diaz will impact that, or is this someone that they should have in addition to the players that they've already got?
Well, obviously Diaz coming in, it adds that much needed depth that everyone's always talking about, and that that criticism that's always thrown at Liverpool is we lack depth and we don't have the quality on the bench. So what Diaz brings is that. So if you lose then Mane or Salah or Firmino, then you're back to square one really, and you're back to not having the depth. So I'd like to think that it would, they would extend their contracts, but that's up to them. I think so. Klopp, like Ian said, would like to keep all of them. Who wouldn't? But the squad does have to be refreshed at some point, and you can't let them all age together. You need to bring that average age of the front three down. But you're starting to see that the links appear. You're starting to see rumours that Spain want, or the Spanish clubs want Mane or Firmino, and they might decide that they want to move on. They might decide that the time at Liverpool has come to an end. But interestingly, though, I do feel like whether or not Salah wanting his contract, whether or not his then means that I don't know if that's one of the other questions, but whether or not his contract, whether or not they can afford to keep both of them, and whether or not Mane's demands are similar to that of Salah's. I do feel like Mane winning AFCON, he sort of has that string to his bow now. He has that in his armour, and whether or not he demands similar sorts of wages, and whether or not that's something that Liverpool can afford. I think that would be interesting to see.
Yeah, plenty of questions around contract study. I mean, Brian Caldwell asks, is it basically between Sadio Mane and Mohamed Salah, or can Liverpool do both? As Hannah says there, obviously, ideally, you'd probably like to do both, but does it mean if one signs, the other one is any less likely?
Not really. Don't think they're linked, to be honest. I think Salah and Mane's contracts do separate things. Same with Firmino. I think we've also got to bear in mind that Liverpool have shown their hand a little bit by trying to sign Carvalho, which I'm sure we'll get a question on that a bit later on. But that does suggest that a couple of players could leave in the forward line in the summer. So we'll have to wait and see. But Salah's contract is something completely different to Mane's.
We might as well talk about Fabio Carvalho now then. I mean, he's obviously a player that can play in the midfield areas as well. He can play in the forward line options. We've said on previous podcasts that you probably expect him to come in the summer. And again, it's just that next step in the evolution, as Hannah says as well, Doyle, in terms of the sort of lowering the age of the squad, increasing the likelihood of them being able to keep the succession plans going.
Well, they've already been doing it. The great myth is that they just left the squad edge because they haven't, because they got Canate, didn't they, last summer? They got Jota the year before that. Harvey Elliott, who people at the time were thinking, that's not really a proper signing in 2019. It's like, well, they're not saying that now, are they? So, Liverpool they've addressed certain matters. Not all of them will come off, because not all signings do come off. In fact, Liverpool's record of the actual, given the money they spent on players, almost all of them have ended up being successes, and even the ones that haven't been massive successes, where you could argue, for example, is Naby Keita been worth his £52.75 million? Well, he won the Premier League, he won the Champions League, he won those trophies. So I'd say from that respect, yeah, that did pay off.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move on to Alex Fogarty's question, Hannah. He talks again about the kind of succession plans and what might happen in the future. He says, with Harvey Elliott rejoining the first team after injury, Curtis Jones and Tyler Morton also impressing when given opportunities, do Liverpool actually need to enter the transfer market for another midfielder come the summer?
I think they do. I think there's still a Wijnaldum-shaped hole in the squad, and Milner's contract's expiring at the end of the season, so it might be that he moves on as well. So when you look at it, at the moment we've got a lot of midfielders, but come the summer that might not be the case, and there's still question marks as well over the futures of Naby Keita and Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain. They're in a similar situation where their contracts are expiring at a similar time, so you don't quite know yet. There's still question marks, but hopefully they will extend their contracts and they will stay, but there's still question marks. So I think midfield is a glaring position, I think, in Liverpool's squad where they need to add depth, and they're probably going to need to dip into the market to do that. Without a doubt, they've got quality youngsters coming through. I mean, Harvey Elliott especially is exceptional and one of the most exciting young players I've seen in the last few years. So, but even then, there's still the question of whether or not over time he moves further forward. Obviously, through a lot of his youth days, he was playing further forward and more on the wing. Obviously, he's dropped back into midfield in order to break into this Liverpool team. So whether or not over time he moves further forward, that might be the case, and in which case you're going to need more midfielders, but you need experience as much as you need youth. So if you're losing experienced players and potentially in the likes of Milner, or you've lost Wijnaldum as well, you need to bring players in to help that. So I still think a midfielder should be and most likely will be a top priority for the summer.
Should that be the priority, Doyle, in terms of the midfield, or is Fabio Carvalho the kind of answer to that? Is that the player that Liverpool think that they might use in that midfield area?
Well, I think if they are going to sign him and they get it done, then he won't be somebody to go straight into the team and play every single week, but it could be, an option in the terms of possibly replacing one of Keita or Oxlade-Chamberlain. I'd be surprised if the pair of them are both still at the club this time next year. I think Liverpool are midfield short going on the long term because, as Hannah said about Milner, as we mentioned then about Oxlade-Chamberlain and Keita, Henderson's not getting any younger. Henderson, we've said a few times, will probably take on the Milner role, which is fair enough. But they probably need more of a defence-minded midfielder or someone who's a bit of a box-to-box. Not exactly like Wijnaldum, but there are players out there. But the only problem is for players like that, Liverpool would want to sign them of age 23, 24, and they're going to cost quite a lot of money. And I know there's one England international playing in Germany at the moment who I think everybody would quite like to see play for Liverpool. But if they do go for him, don't be surprised if one or two other players, disappear, get sold. Not going to just like get rid of them, but they get sold because they're going to have to pay for it, and also because they need the space in the squad. You don't spend that much money on a player and then just say you're going to be playing every 3 weeks. You'd be expected to be playing most weeks, and then suddenly Liverpool have got a lot of options again in midfield. So Klopp said this at the moment he's got everybody fit. It's unusual, and it is unusual. I think Liverpool have got 8 midfielders at the moment to pick from, and that's not counting Tyler Morton. So there's plenty of them to go at the moment, but that could be all changed in the next. It was only December? That's when Tyler Morton was playing against Tottenham in the first team because everybody else couldn't play. So it wasn't that long ago that they had nobody available. So Liverpool at the moment just have to make the most of what they've got. But in the summer, as Hannah said, I think a new midfielder, that is the priority now because they've already got the main forward in already.
Yeah, a couple of questions now from Fergus Mac Yokida. I'm going to go with. Apologies if I've butchered that. Let's say that's right. I've said it reasonably confidently. And Fergus asks Hannah, Naby Keita, Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain, and Takumi Minamino. Could Liverpool cut losses on each of them to save money on the wage bill in the summer? And how likely is it, do you think, that they might be tempted to sort of listen to offers for those players?
There's certainly 3 names that have struggled to really establish themselves as first team players and regular starters under Klopp. So there are certainly decisions that need to be made there. Obviously, Minamino is one that, was a very low risk signing in terms of the money that he was bought in for. So, but he's failed to really hit the ground running and, ended up going out on loan to Southampton at the end of for the second half of last season. So I think it's clear that he's not quite at that level of Mohamed Salah and Sadio Mane, but you wouldn't have expected him to be anyway, really. But that does then mean there is that drop off. So that's why ultimately Luis Diaz has been brought in. If anything, it sort of feels like it will largely be down to them and whether or not they feel like they'll get more game time elsewhere and whether or not the players themselves feel like it's best for their careers to move on at this point if they're not going to, truly break into this Liverpool starting 11 and they're not going to be regular starters, or whether or not they want to stay and fight for their place. It doesn't really strike me as a case of trying to cut players off the wage bill or anything like that. And Naby Keita is one especially that I would like to think has a future at Liverpool, and you wouldn't, want to necessarily move him on. He was bought in for 50 million, and for the money that was, he's maybe not quite lived up to that level of expectation of being a regular starter, but injuries have played their part. But he's certainly still young enough that I'd say he does have a future at Liverpool, and he's got time on his hands really to prove himself and become a regular starter at Liverpool. But for Ox and Naby especially, with where they're at with their contracts, decisions will be made. They might not all stay, but there's certainly, I'd say, still room for them in the squad.
Yeah, certainly a little bit of movement could be possible in the summer for each of those 3. And Fergus's second question, well, his third question actually, his second question was how long will it be until he becomes the Watford manager? But we'll move beyond that one. His third question was, Doyle, what have you made of Thiago Alcantara so far? And will he prove to be a good buy? I suppose the question is, has he been a good buy already? I'd probably argue that he has been, to be honest. But in terms of his Liverpool career so far, how much have we seen from him and how much more could there be from him in future?
Well, I think he's been decent, actually. I mean, what was his record? We were talking about this the other day. The last 20 games he started, Liverpool were beaten and they've won the last 15. So I'd say that's pretty good going for him. Obviously at the beginning there was he got the injury, didn't he? Yeah, COVID got the injury, and then he walked into a Liverpool team that suddenly went absolutely rubbish. So that didn't help so much. But he was integral to them finishing the top 4 last season. When he's played this season, say they've won all 10 games that he started. So he is going to be important. And we've spoken about the partnership he's got with Fabinho in midfield. That seems to work very well. And then it's always somebody else just seems to pop in the third slot, and whoever it is, you just keep on getting the results. So he's somebody who can control a game. Somebody he obviously what's been interesting for me is that he's clearly he has the graft as well, doesn't he? Likes getting stuck in. When he first came, he went to ground an awful lot with slide tackles and kept on getting booked, and it was like, come on, don't do that. And you saw that against Leicester on Thursday. He put in quite a few good tackles, dispossessed Leicester players a few times, got Liverpool moving, and he's the kind of player that they brought him in, didn't they, to when they come up against these teams who have play a very defensive setup, he can move them around. And I can think of the Wolves game away this season where he had a very good game, and I know Liverpool left it late, but the constant pressure was helped by him. And there's been quite a few games as well where he's done pretty well. So yeah, I think he's been good. And that's not so much that he's got more to come. What is he now? He's nearly 30 if he's not already 30. So most players by then have kind of like done, they've reached their peak, as it were. But if he continues just contributing the way he has been for this season, next season, whatever, then he'll have been a success. But ultimately, it's just on trophies, and the good news for Liverpool is they're in one final and they're still in a chance with the other three.
Yeah, absolutely. As long as he keeps doing what he's doing, I think Jurgen Klopp will be pretty happy with that. It's interesting whenever we do these Q&As, Hannah, we always get questions about the formation. Obviously, Jurgen Klopp has toyed a little bit with a 4-2-3-1 at times, a 4-3-3. Obviously, Thiago can play in each of those systems. And Aki Johansson asks, could we see now, presumably with the addition of Luis Diaz in mind as well, a bit more of a change up in formations for Liverpool moving forwards? Could it be that they go for a 4-4-2 or a 4-2-3-1? Or do you think this 4-3-3 is just best suited to this Liverpool squad, and this might be the way that he just continues to move with?
That's an interesting one. I feel like, particularly for the big games, we know he likes his 4-3-3, and that I feel like probably allows for the most control, particularly in the midfield. But he's certainly got the attacking options that he's got the ability to do that. You can drop Firmino a little bit deeper and put Jota up front, and it allows you to get pretty much all your main attackers on the pitch, particularly against low block sides when you're in search of a goal. You sometimes do see Klopp turn to that. So whether or not we see a bit more of that in the second half of the season, who knows? But I highly doubt it'll be you'd see a complete switch and a complete change in his formations in terms of starting in a lot of games. So certainly the flexibility within the squad that he's got options. He can change it up when he needs to, but I highly doubt. Maybe in terms of the Carvalho links as well, I've seen some fans saying that maybe that's an indicator of what he might look to do in the future in terms of bringing in some, more attack-minded midfielders in terms of having that number 10 role in a 4-2-3-1. But certainly, with the players that he's got at the moment and with where we're at with the squad, I don't see any major, formation switches permanently. But I imagine it'll just be the same as usual, really, where he changes it up when he needs to, and he's got the options to do so.
Yeah, certainly good to have the option, isn't it? Even if he does stick with a 4-3-3 in the main. Just one last question to go. Papa Noel, which I'm assuming is a pseudonym, but you never know. Doyle, he asks, everyone's
I'd like
asking,
to think that is his real name. I'd like to think that's his real name, yeah.
Yeah, let's say it is. Hopefully I've not offended him there if it is. Everyone is asking about Mohamed Salah's contract, Papa asks. But I want to know, what about Jurgen Klopp? Is there a chance that the boss could sign an extension beyond 2024 as well?
I got asked this question on a podcast the other week, or I don't even know whether it was a podcast or whatever it was, and then one of our friendly neighbourhood fan websites picked up on a quote that had said, and no, I know what it was. It was a Q&A. It was a Q&A on our website, and I'd said, yeah, I reckon he'll go at the end of his contract. He'll have already lasted longer than he has at any other job. I mean, there's some James Milner quotes seen today where he basically said that last year he thought that Klopp looked like he was getting, losing a little bit of energy out, given not just managing Liverpool, but managing Liverpool in a time of the pandemic, no fans, all the injuries. He's obviously worrying about his own family as well, and it kind of affected him in that way. But this season, Milner said he's been fine. He's been back to his old self. He's been incredible. He's been driving Liverpool forward in the dressing room and on the training ground. So in that respect, he's enjoying it just as much as he probably has done for a while, which always helps when you're winning, obviously. But yeah, I think at the end of his contract, I would be very surprised if he signed another one, because the other thing as well, how old is he going to be? Like 54, 55? But yeah, I mean, I'm 45 covering Liverpool and I'm tired. So imagine what he's like. What he's like actually being the manager of them and having to face people like me every other day doing a press conference. So it's no wonder he gets a little bit, that's before any of his actual job that he's supposed to be doing, winning games, signing players, picking the right teams, training them, etc., etc. So it's quite a lot to do. When you then put on top of that the pressure of, trying to win things and chase a Man City team that's, well, we all know what they've got behind them, so which Liverpool don't have, and let's face it, practically nobody else does either. So there is all of that, and he's a very passionate man. He can distance himself from certain things, but I think it's a job that we've seen. We saw what happened with Gerard Houllier with the job. We saw what happened with Rafa Benitez. We've seen what happened with Kenny Dalglish. We saw what happened with Brendan Rodgers, actually, to a certain degree. Is that it can, just take over your life, and it doesn't always have a positive effect. But yeah, Klopp seems to have avoided that. And if he gets to 9 years and he says, "I've had enough, thank you very much," I don't think anyone's going to have blame him too much for it, because he'll have been, Liverpool's longest-serving manager since Bob Paisley and then Bill Shankly. Which, if he's up there with those two, then he's obviously done something right.
Is there not a temptation, though, when you think of, obviously you mentioned there, behind closed doors for one of those seasons, hasn't had the chance to celebrate the Premier League title? Does that season count?
Well, yeah, it does count. Don't say that. I had to go to all of the games. I'm not saying that didn't count. I had to sit through them. But yeah, I know what you're saying, because I've thought this at the time. It's like, it wasn't so much the fact, you think of, there were so many players who were at the peak, not just Liverpool but across the world, who played an entire season, more than a season, where they got to the end of it and went, this wasn't proper football. We may have been kicking a ball around, the same rules and everything, but it wasn't the reason why we came into the game and why we get paid all this money that we do get paid. So, I think no, I don't think you can say it doesn't count. In fact, if anything, it's the fact that he probably might have definitely had enough because he had to get through that season. That's what's taken it out of him. But at the moment, he's clearly planning for the future. He's going to be there for at least another 2 years, 2 and a bit years. So it's the end of the season, another 2. So won't be worrying about it too much. When it gets to like that last season, it starts, and if Liverpool start well, that's when the clamour will begin. I would imagine.
Yeah, be interested on the timing of when he decides to do one thing or the other as well. I'm sure he won't want that to sort of overshadow whatever it is that season that happens. But I think that'll do us. Just about all we've got time for on this Blood Red Q&A special. Thank you to Ian and to Hannah for your answers. Thank you for submitting your questions as well. I'm sure we'll do one of these again very soon. But for the time being, thank you very much. It's goodbye for now.